Hey, this is Tiger. Welcome to my stream in Train Sim World 4. Good evening, AJ, and Dobry chladný večer, City Radar. Nice to have you both on the stream. Tonight we are competing with Matt doing his whole weekend marathon stream for a charity and a good cause. And we are just doing it for the Vectron and the Asynchronous AC traction motor. So, very nice to have you on the stream, and thank you very much for bearing with me tonight. Yeah, by now we actually have this music in the intro and in the menu that Dovetail Games obviously paid money for, and that they have an orchestra in the introduction stream. Now we have the birds and the violins. The CD Radar says he turned it off instantly. Well, it turns off as soon as we are going into the routes. Now I actually have to shout not only over the locomotive but also over the music. Probably you can turn the music off, I don't know. General accessibility controls, HUD audio, maybe. If it is an audio. Yes. Then I don't have to shout that much anymore. Well, it's the Vectron today, and the Vectron, I have to admit, I played around with it during this week specifically, and it is by far the best locomotive that there is in the game. There cannot be much debate about it. There are other great locomotives, there are other fun locomotives in the game, there are locomotives that have their own right and that I would not want to miss in the game, but this Vectron locomotive sets new standards in how complex the simulation of the subsystems is, how you can actually see what is happening, how the brake systems is adjusted and stuff. So this is really a masterpiece of not only William Green's hands, but at least not to the least his work in scripting the simograph and all the simulations. So really a big thank you to that, also for communicating all the issues on the forums, and also that it is international loco of EU. Yes, City Radar, you are totally right. It is a locomotive that is everywhere in Europe, and if you look at all the different let's just go into one of the services that had been added with the Vectron in Dresden, Riesa. You can recognize them that they by the fact that they have a number, and typically they have Czech names, right? Česká Čebová to Bremerhaven, or other thingies, Ječín, and what that might be, you can tell me. Knuckle. What that actually means, I have not been able to figure this out. To figure this out. Dietschin, yes, it is very close to the border to Germany from what I've seen on the map, and those trains are... Yes. Knuckle. Whatever this might be, here is it again, right? It might be some freight yard or whatever, but my Czech is not good enough to figure out what this is actually the abbreviation for. So if you look at one of those services, they are all services that sported the new Eanos cars. What is great? The cars are great. I think the simulation of the cars is great as well. What is not so super great is that all the new services are more or less identical. You always get like 23 of these Eanos cars loaded up to a certain degree, and you run them in long loco formation in PZB U. From what I have Oh, that is a long explanation for... Well, that means Lavni, Nadrashi, Nakladni, Nadrashi, probably station. Okay, so that is the main freight train station. If I can get this. That makes a lot of sense, right? So that is the abbreviation for Lavni, what means mains, and Nakladni is for freight, and then probably there must be the station somewhere in between. So let's have a look at this service. We're not running this, we're running a different one. But here our beautiful Vectron, still with the lights out. And what is also great is this material and the surface and what it looks like is really, really, really beautiful. And here those bluish Eanos cars, and well, yeah, you even have a marking about the C pressure and the T pressure and how far the piston of the brake cylinder is supposed to extract. If you look under the cars, I'm not entirely sure if everything that needs to be there is actually here. This must be the brake cylinder here, with the cutout switch for the brake cylinder, and this is the Lösezug, where you can let the air out of the brake cylinder. Obviously the switch for G and P, and yeah, brake shoes. You can, this drainage is not for the brakes, I think this is for actually the load. Yes, you can see that a lot in Czech. Hn is like Hauptbahnhof in Germany. I see. So it's the main would be the Lavni, and N is then only for the station. Děčín is last big city by northern border near Bad Schandau. Yes. I see. Yeah. So those services here, you can see the train is quite heavy. It's, if you subtract the locomotive, 23 cars, full with something that looks like coal or aggregate or something like that. So you would have to set your, we're just doing this, we're not driving this one, but we're just doing this. You will have to set your PZB mode. Why am I doing this? I have my sheet prepared actually. So let's look at the sheet first, because I've updated our calculator sheet, or my calculator sheet, together with Open-Minded's timetables, Buchfahrpläne for Dresden Nahverkehr, and the old services that are in the sheet are still valid, and the new ones I have added. So this was the service that started at about 1333 or something. So if we go to Dresden and look at the 1333 or 32, and we should get the one that we are looking for. Yes, Eanos cars, 23 of them, plus the one Vectron, and if you calculate that loaded up to the game value, the game uses in the scenarios a different load state than in the timetable mode, but in the timetable mode it's always the same. And if you calculate that through, you end up with 63 Bremshundertstel brake percentage, what puts you, because it is lower than 66 in PZB U, and because of the weight of the cars, or the mass to be exact, being more than 1600, you need to run it in LL. You can run it in LL even if it, even though it is beyond the 1600, because there are no bad multiple units in the train and all the cars are heavy enough. This is where your brake information gives you in my sheet. So what would we have to do actually? We would have to go in this screen here, number 8 for the settings, and we would have to switch PZB to U. Brake setting is already in G for the locomotive, but locomotive is not enough in this case, since we have to run it in long loco formation. We will have to go along the train and set the first 5 vehicles into G to build the long loco formation, and then we would actually be set up correctly. And Česká Třebová is a small village in center of country, but it is a major train junction with a lot of sidings, and also old trains stand here for scrapping. And also the Czech loco manufacturer, the CZ loco manufacturer, manufactures its locomotive here. Interesting thing to know. So this is where those trains are actually supposed to come from, or to go to, before they run between Dresden and Riesa. Well, yeah, so that would be the setup for the new services. I actually wanted to run a different service, one that starts in Röderau. What is this little side branch before you get to Riesa, actually, and drive this train home to Dresden a bit faster. It will be a PZB M train, and with a GP setting, so only the locomotive will be set to G. Vectron again. I'm almost back with my DLCs on the Epic Games Store. I'm still missing the Train Sim World 3 routes and the Great Western Express for some reason. But I am still hopeful that things will come over the next few days. So the 905, I think it was, that I wanted to run. Going from Röderau to Dresden along the Berliner Bahn, the part of the track that cuts through the hills to avoid Coswig and all the stations on the line there. So if we do the calculations for that one in our sheet, for Dresden, as I have already said, you can always select the presets for it. They are already prepared in the tool that you can get from my Discord server. If you want to use it for your own formations, you can always do that. So the sheet is customizable. You can put together your formation whatever you find in the game, as long as the vehicles are in my sheet. If you have some vehicles that I should put into the sheet, just tell me, and I will do my best. Although the older DLCs, all that was released before Dresden Riesa, they typically have freight cars with sometimes a bit nonsensical physics, so they don't make a lot of sense to put in there. But I have added the Vectron, obviously, and the Eanos cars, and maybe we will add more stuff. So this is our service here, the 905. With the Vectron, we have 36 single cars of autorack cars, Laaers 560. Those are cars that come in pairs, as you can see. So we have 18 pairs of them loaded. The cars are on them, and we've got the values from the game with the loaded brake. They have an automatic load change, so the brake weight will in the cars department always be the same as the gross weight of the cars. That gives us 91 brake percentage, Bremsung still, and that puts us, because it is between 66 and 111, into PZB mode M. The brakes can be set to GP, that means the locomotive brakes needs to be set to G, the rest can run in P, so we don't have to change this around. Why? Because the mass of all our cars that we are pulling is below the or is between 800 and 1200 tons. So below 800 we can run the whole train in P. Between 800 and 1200 we have to put the loco into G, the rest can run in P, and above the 1200 we have at least to put the first 5 cars into G to make a long loco formation. Sometimes we even have to put the whole train in G, but there is no service in the Nahverkehr Dresden that requires the full train set to G. Yeah, you can see that if you put cars in G, then the brakes will have to have a certain subtraction or a discount in the brake percentage, and this will reflect in the Bremshundertstel at some point. Yeah, this is where we are. So M and GP, that is easy for us, and then open-minded make those nice timetables. So we are running Dresden, I always say Riesa to Dresden on the Berliner Bahn. That means this is actually the relevant timetable that we have to adhere to. It tells us that we can go the 80 at Riesa, and then before accelerating to 120 we have a small batch where we have to we have to stay below the 115. This will not hurt us badly because we will have to accelerate to 120 anyway. You can always see if the kilometers and the maximum speeds are printed in white on black, then this is a special reduction that is not signaled on the track, and it is in the timetable because of our Bremshundertstel, because of our brake percentage. So for our specific train with the 91 Bremshundertstel, we have to be a bit slower with accelerating to 120, and when we are going onto the Berliner Bahn here, we have to slow down to 110 below the track limit of 120 for this part. As soon as we are over this little hill, then we can accelerate to 120 again, and then when we are running downhill on the other side, we have to slow down to 115 until we hit the main line from Coswig, and then we are back on the normal schedule. So obviously this Buchfahrplan we would have in a printed copy in our locomotive or in a book there. In real life we would also have our Ebular, a computerized system that is not simulated in the game, but we have the screen. You can see it here on the side already, and I want to try to put this Buchfahrplan a bit in the area where the Ebular will be. I cannot. I would have to adjust it a bit like this. So yeah, a bit. It looks a bit like the Ebular system is running there now. If it is annoying you, then just tell me, then I will move it out of the picture. At first, this is what we're starting. So it's the Buchfahrplan, it's not the Ebular. Ebular would run the other way around from bottom to top. But nevertheless, let's try if this is doing anything for us. I will put this on my second screen, and then we can start. We have a red light here to start with, and well, this looks nonsensical. I will move it out of the way at least until we are actually moving the train. So the red signal already switched to I will set up the loco slowly, and then I will restart the service again so that we can actually pick up the system. This signal, this is an steady yellow over steady yellow. It's an HL signal, one of those old Eastern European system that was used in the German Democratic Republic and is still used in some parts of Eastern Germany, that would tell us that we have to go 40 now and expect to stop at the next signal. To set up the Vectron, the safety systems are back here. They would need it. We need to activate them. Then the parking brake can be applied if it is necessary and released here. The lights on the Vectron is a bit the bad part, I think, because they are sometimes a bit weird. Best thing, I think, is to leave it on auto on both ends and then set the light setting here. With this thingy you can select font, that is the front, what you want there, like 3 white lights, the ZG1 signal. One thing I don't know about is how to set the pantograph. Yeah, we will get to the pantograph in a second, I think. And then on the back, since we have cars there, we actually don't need any lights. So let's just check if we have lights on our locomotive. We have the 3 white lights probably. Can't see it because of the light. Maybe we take a second, some setting for the time of year where we have a bit less light on, and then we can see that. The thing with the pantograph has been discussed on the forums a lot. I think because this is a multi-system locomotive, we have actually 4 different pantographs that all differ in the width and layout, so that they can work with different overhead catenary constructions. And the pantograph is more or less selected by the country setting here. So if you're going to a country setting that just allows a narrower pantograph, then it will take a different one. We can just check it out for whatever reason. Let's take the Slovenian one, for example. It doesn't do. Maybe I have to turn it on first. Master key on, and then I obviously have to open and lower first before I can switch it. Yes, I need to lower it first. So let's just check the Slovenian one and see what happens. Doesn't do anything right now. Enter. Yes, now we have, before you go back, always press the enter one. And we are in the Slovenian setting. And now let's see which pantograph actually gets raised. If we raise it. Set and confirm it before. Didn't we just do it? Well, I thought this was what we just did. We set it and we confirmed it. Set and confirmed. We can see it here. It is punched in. Now it lowers itself because it's the wrong system, obviously. It realizes that it is the wrong system because we set it to 3 kilovolts and it is getting 15 kilovolts from the overhead catenary, so it goes down again on its own. So maybe we take another 15 kilovolts system like the Swedish one. Let's see if the pantograph wants that one. Okay, but it takes the same pantograph. So I don't know what system actually would use a different pantograph here, one that can also take the 15 kilovolts that we have here so that it does not go down just right away. Maybe the Swiss one. Oh, it is still... Let's try the Swiss one. And what happens with the Swiss one? Maybe we can actually find it. See, now a different one gets raised. One of the check puts either one up, but it gets lowered too. Yeah, I think that the idea behind this is that by setting the appropriate system for the country and the voltage and so on, it also selects the pantograph that you want to have. So Bulgaria, Romania, what is that? Republika Srpska, no? And this is Croatia, Hrvatska. This is Slovakia. Two different things. This is Hungary. This is Slovenia, Sweden, Czech Republic, Poland, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Switzerland, Austria, and Germany. Yeah, and then if you pick a certain system and a certain country preset, then it takes the pantograph that confirms with the regulations for this country, and then if you lift it and it gets contact with the overhead catenary and it does not get the kind of current, too much voltage or not the correct frequency, then to prevent further damage it will lower itself again. I think this is the idea that is behind that. So if we actually want to have a working pantograph, then we will have to go back to German system, 15 kilovolts, select that one. I have seen that in some of the Austrian scenarios, you start with a German setting anyway. No, what's it now? I forgot to press enter, did I? Not. Lower it, even if it lowered itself before. Okay, now I'm back. And now it should actually stay up. And it stays up. And we can close the main circuit breaker again. Another thing, closing the main circuit breaker, I want to open it again. And lower the pantograph. That was still a raise. You can see it here in this display grade here. This always tells you how much voltage you're getting from the overhead catenary, and this tells you where your pantograph is. This is pantograph is down, pantograph is down. This is the number of your locomotive. If you raise the pantograph, then you can see how you're getting 15 or even a bit more kilovolts of overhead catenary, and it tells you the switch is still open. Then it takes a bit, and then you get this icon telling you the switch is still open, but it is no longer crossed out. But that means that now you can actually close it. And this icon now tells you you've got a traction lock. And this traction lock will go away when you put in the reverser to forward. And the brake system is telling you abgesperrt. That is great German word for Führerbremsventil abgesperrt. That means the driver's brake valve is locked, is cut out still, and the blue one says Bremse angelegt. That is, brake is applied. And obviously we can't start the locomotive if the brake is applied, and if we can't handle the Führerbremsventil, the brake lever, that is this one. So to be able to handle the brakes, you have to cut them in, and then this red message will go off, and we can release the brakes. You can see here how the brake pipe fills. This indicator shows the brake pipe, how it is filled up to 5 bars. And the upper range here, 3 to 5, is the service brake application. As soon as it is blue, then the brakes are released. And the lower one will be the emergency brake reservoir, or not reservoir, or the range up to 0. This strange icon that looks a bit like a pair of feet is actually the brake pipe with the hoses on both ends of the locomotive. as soon as as much as I can understand it. Yeah, obviously you cannot go with the front up then. This is the downside of a multi-system locomotive. If you have 4 different instruments on your roof, then you can just... then you have to use the one that goes with your system. Right? And typically you don't want to use the one that is at the front, except for those thingies that you have goods that don't that can't be that need to be protected from arcs and sparks and stuff, and so you would use the front one. But well, that's it. If you have a multi-system locomotive, then you have to take the pantograph that actually works with the system that you're running at. So you have to make compromises a bit. Yeah, here you can see the main reservoir. It is filled to 9.3 bars. And underneath are the 2 brake cylinders for bogie 1 and bogie 2. This is 1 and 2. And if we are actually applying the brake, like putting that into... this is the other way around, quick release. You can see how it overcharges the brake pipe at the moment to make the brakes release faster. This will be probably changed with the next patch, because if you look into the manual for this locomotive, then it tells you that you in Germany you won't overcharge the brake pipe when putting it into the quick release setting. So CD Radar says, I see our Vectrons run on inner back one and some Metrans freight run on inner front up, but we are using DC on half of our country. Maybe that is the reason for it then. We would have to look into a manual to see which pantograph actually works with what system, right? Yeah. Main reservoir is always getting filled up to 10 bars until we lose some again. So if we are applying the brakes, we can see how the brake pipe pressure drops. And it gets yellow to indicate that it is below the regular value, and at the same time the brake cylinders are filling also with yellow. And if we release the brakes again, and it works the other way around. So great, really great indicators here. Here on the other side we have 1, 2, 3, 4 driving motors, and you can see how they are working and sometimes applying different amounts of traction. On slippery ground you can see how one of them starts slipping and the wheel slip protection system tries to stabilize this one. Then there is also a program, we will talk about this later when we are running this locomotive, that if you are running at certain speeds and set your power handle below certain thresholds, then to save the traction motors from wear and tear, the locomotive will cut out 2 of them and will only run with 2 of them. You can see all that happening here on the display, and this is the sum of all the traction force. You can see certain limits that are specified for traction blue and for electric braking yellow. If you are applying dynamic brakes, then this indicator will not be blue for traction but yellow for dynamic brakes. So that is really great. Those 2 thingies are not working. Those are the settings. So you can see you can select the brake force and the traction force. You can set a limit for the current that you are getting from your overhead catenary, and this is for the Notbremsüberbrückung, meaning if you are actually running a passenger train, how you can override the passenger emergency brake application. It is aus here, it is off, because we're running a freight train, obviously. PZB mode, we have discussed this, and the brake setting too, and this is the train lights that we need if we use passengers, not freight. This is for the AFB, so we have released our brakes actually. Good thing that we are not rolling away.
AFB.
If there is
AFB.
this line
AFB.
across this icon, that means the AFB is activated. The AFB, once activated, it will always use the brake cylinders on the locomotive to apply a holding brake. So it will apply pressure in the brake cylinders, you can see that here, without lowering the pressure in the brake pipe, at least in the German setting. So it only uses the direct brake, the locomotive brake, the one that is operated with this handle here, typically. And the AFB will do that. So if we activate the AFB without doing anything else, it will have a holding brake. Very convenient. You would set the AFB speed here. You can see on this handle here the current AFB, what is 0, and the target AFB speed that you are setting at the moment. I moved it to 40, so this thing moved about. And to actually punch it in, to tell the loco, no, I really want you to go to 40, you have to press this handle here, and then you can see this gets solid, stops flashing, and then the locomotive will go for that speed, and the AFB is working really great. There is no overshooting anymore, no weird jumps up and down. It really works well. And then you have to obviously apply or allow the AFB to use throttle, and with your throttle setting you will always limit the power that the AFB is using. It will not limit the amount of dynamic brakes that it is using. It will always go to the max here. So what did you say? Same with multi-system Taurus. Yeah, I think it is the same thing with multi-system locomotives. Yeah, you can't have like 4 or even 2 pantographs for 28 different systems that are running on the locomotive. You have to make do with what you have. But before we talk more about that, let's restart this service with a bit of a different weather setting and with a bit more like a morning atmosphere, and then actually run it. You have already spent almost 40 minutes in talking about this locomotive. You actually ask your train driver friends about that. Yes, do that. That would be really interesting to know. Please report what they say. It was the 905 that I wanted to run. And that was October, baby. We go into November and with heavy clouds. Yeah, it's a bit less. I will turn this one off since the Ebula is not working anyway.
RFB. RFB. RFB.
After you set the AFB, you can release the brakes because the AFB will apply the holding brake. And then during the time that the brakes need to release, we can turn on the safety systems. Angleicher aktiviert, by the way. If that is active here, that tells you that you actually overcharged your brake system to make all the cars adapt to the same brake force. This will stop after a while, and then you know that the brake system is set up properly. Signals again are 40 now. Expect to stop at the next signal. Pantograph main circuit breaker is already all good. This telephone has a bit of a weird sound, hasn't it? It clunks about quite heavily. From what I've experienced is that those car transport freight cars have brakes that release really slowly. So if I apply throttle now, you can see we're actually applying traction. All traction motors are applying force. The AFB holding brake has been released. Oh, there is still... a marker on. I don't want this marker on. And we are still not really moving, only very, very slowly. If at all. I think this is because the brakes on those cars are really releasing very reluctantly. Let's see how much traction force we can apply. Good thing that the wheels have these holes so that you can see properly that we are actually setting the train in motion. I think this all runs much smoother if you wait a couple of minutes for the brakes to release. I think this is, I remember faintly William Green talking about a bug with the brakes releasing much too slowly on those cars here. This is the brake marking for the locomotive. You can see the locomotive has a mass of 89 tons and in P a brake weight of 95 tons, in G one of 72. If you are allowed to use the electric brake, then you can write 105. This is for the parking brake, and this would be the R brake that can only be used. Now I have to be careful because I have to acknowledge this signal here. We got 1000 Hertz monitoring in PZB M. This limits us to 70, respectively 65 if we subtract the 5 margin of error. Signal changed, by the way. You might have seen it when we just passed it. It was 40 now. Expect slow. And expect slow was the flashing yellow on top of the signal. And expect slow can mean 40 or 60. Depends on yeah, the specific location where you're getting the signal. I think it is 60 here. If we get the expect slow here, the next signal will be at 60. Since the PZB allows us 70, we can accelerate to 60 actually. But not before we are out of the starting program. Starting program is still running, limiting us to 45. That is the CIFA, by the way. Next signal, the yellow part on the bottom says 60 now. The green part on the top says clear then. So 60 now, expect clear, and as soon as we are out of our restricted 1000 Hertz from the starting program, we can accelerate to 60. The signal we just passed did not need to be acknowledged, and now the 1000 Hertz lamp came off. We can actually release because we were allowed to go faster than 30, and there is no additional monitoring or influencing within the next 550 meters. The driver assist always reminds you to punch in the speed for the AFB. Now I'm activating the train length counter. As soon as we are beyond the switch, it will give us a roadrunner sound and at the same time run here on the yellow background. And more or less at the same time, when the 60 here is switching to 120, we will hear that sound, or shortly after. And this yellow countdown will stop. Yeah, the train length counter is great. Yeah, you saw? Now we can set the AFP to 120. Activate it. And we can allow the AFB to pull us to 120. You can see all the traction motors are butting in heavily. This second column here is the current that we are actually drawing from the overhead catenary. Not only the voltage, but the amperage. And the higher that is, the more power we're actually drawing. Next distance signal is green, so we can go 1. CD Radar says, okay, so my friend the driver says that it is possible to set which pantograph rises, but the switch is in the engine room. It is possible to ride on both raised, and it also says that on the DC system it can be set via the display, but not in AC. Oh, and while I read this, I missed the neutral section. And the main circuit breaker got kicked out by the under voltage protection relay. So we have to close our main circuit breaker again, set the throttle to 0. And set it here. Okay, so the amends are actually made in the simulation in the game. Since we do not have an engine room, all the pantograph selection is connected with the system and the country that you are selecting. Now I actually try to switch in that thingy here. And it tells us that the next interesting thing for us, if we are not getting any adverse signals, is that we have to slow down to 110 when we are diverging on the Berliner Bahn. What I can demonstrate on the way until we get there is how the locomotive cuts out certain traction motors when we are setting the throttle below a certain value. Now I set the throttle below 65, and we will see that the first traction motor is supposed to cut out after like 15 seconds or something. We'll see if that happens. Yeah, you can see the first traction motor is cutting out, and we are running on 3 traction motors only now. And if I do the same thing, put it below, I think 35, then the third one is supposed to cut out, and we will only run on 2 and 4. Yep. Idea obviously is it is better to only use 2 traction motors with a higher load than all 4 of them with a very low load. If you don't want to do that, you can put the throttle to 70, for example, and then all 4 of them cut in again. What about the lights, by the way? Yeah, the lights are correct, even though we just left it on auto. So for player services it typically works with the lights. Well, the headlights that are not the high beams are normally a bit weird. Did you see the Siemens new comfort jet? No, I did not see that. Now we're already at the junction to the Berliner Bahn, and we have to prepare for the slowdown to 110. We can use the gradient for that. You can see that there is a train that is waiting there to let us pause. A 204 actually. The one that should be drivable in the DLC here, but is not for some reason. So we slowed down to the 110 on this part because of the steep gradient. You can see it here. This is why open-minded's timetable calculates for our brake percentage that we have to slow down to 110 here. Even though the general limit is 160, obviously this is not true for a freight train. A freight train in Germany can under no normal circumstances, without a special permit from the Eisenbahnbundesamt, cannot go faster than 120. This is a limit set out by the law. It is basically the same as Interjet or modernized railjet, but it has cab car that looks like Vectron, and they call it Vectrain. I will have to Google that afterwards. That sounds sweet. Another thing that this locomotive does, it actually counts the power that we have used up and the power that we have regenerated with regenerative braking. So we have already used 523.45 Kilowattstunden, kilowatts, hours, and we have not braked so far. You can reset this value by pushing this button here. See, it went back to 0. And the bigger number is what we are actually applying in traction force at the moment, kilonewtons, and the small number is the energy that we used. So if you want, we can actually do like runs of the sort who can do the same service with the least energy used. What is CD Radar saying? And they add to some Vectron's new pantographs for Netherlands Bahns so they can make straight lines from Prague to Amsterdam and also to Denmark. Yeah, I can see the point. But then they have really like a Swiss Army knife, an assortment of different tools on the roof, right? This is the spot where we can accelerate again. Train length counter. Actually, it's here. Pantograph AFB is holding us nicely to the 110 until the train has run its length, and then I can set it to the 120. And we can start accelerating to the 120. Next point will be 22.6 That's always the numbers that are given on those hectometric signs. We're at 27.6 at the moment, so we have about 5 kilometers until we have to slow down again to 115, so not that much. 2 for DC, 1 for AC, and 1 with 4 blades for Dutch. Well, I think then the opportunities to choose from your pantographs on the roof are actually limited. Are we getting any rain? Looks a bit like it. What a great Loco this is, and those sounds as well. Yes, you are right. I actually wonder if DTG is afraid that they will lose the goodwill of Alstom Bombardier, because the Siemens Loco is so great and the Trax 3 is so much less so, right? They definitely have to beef up the Trax 3 and have a decent version of it too. That would be just fair, I think. So slowing down to 115. Since we're in a gradient, I'm just setting the throttle to 0. Let the train slow down, and then AFB and power again. But one more thing, you can't see if doors are open on passenger trains. Yes. There should be a door indicator somewhere on this display, right? Like the one with ZP9, the green circle on white ground with the T in the middle. So much cars, and all of them are silver. So much cars, so many cars, obviously. Now we're actually overshooting a little bit. We're at 116. Well, now I only wait for ICE4 and Railjet with Modern Taurus, and then I will be super happy with game. Well, I have to admit I am quite happy with the game, with the Train Sim World 4. It was a much... So from my expression, the launch of Train Sim World 4, there was much more heart and thought in the process than compared to Train Sim World 3. And also from the impression that they give on their streams, I think that the head honchos on DTG, they actually put more thought and consideration into this new version. And this is what you can totally feel. The ICE4 obviously will be a huge project, and a new modern Taurus. Well, I think we should get an Alstom locomotive. A second super OP Siemens locomotive in the game. I think they can't do that for political reasons. When can we accelerate to 120 again? When we get to the main line, obviously. So ICE4, Taurus, Vectron, that's all Siemens. And Czech route, obviously. But probably that does not happen. Yeah. This will happen as soon as I have learned enough Czech to understand the Czech signaling rules. So maybe 2040 or something. But know what? Before we actually run into the main line again and back to Dresden and get hopefully some signaling action, the presentation. The presentation about the kind of traction motors that are used on modern locomotives like the Vectron. We have looked at, and this is the British Railways Class 313, the DC traction motors that were used like until 1990 roundabout in the 1990s, and we always had the problem that we had a fixed voltage that we were getting from a third rail or from the overhead catenary, and we had to run it through our traction motors. We had the DC traction motors, we ran the voltage through it and then out again into the rail as a return. Yeah, and if we were getting it with the shoes, we were just running it through our traction motors. And we have learned in the part about the vintage traction control that we can put resistances in this circuit so that we don't throw the whole voltage and the traction motors in one piece, but we have the resistances lowering the current that is going through the circuit. And if we are starting our train, we want a decent amount of voltage on our traction motors to get them turning with high torque in the beginning and not so much rotations. And then when we start accelerating, we could cut out our resistances and make more or give more voltage on our traction motors, make them turn faster. And then we learned about the thing that we could do a transition and not run the whole current through all the traction motors on the train, but split them up, and here in pairs, series parallel. So half of the current is going there, half of the current is going there, so that we can have an even higher voltage on the single traction motor. Here cutting out the resistances again until we got to a point where we needed to use the weak field technology. At this point we looked closer at the DC traction motors, the series wound DC traction motors. We have recalled our high school knowledge that if you have a current running through a wire or a loop, then you create an electromagnetic field around this wire, and if you coil it up, then you can intensify this electromagnetic field. If you put a metal core in it, then you can intensify and direct it even more. Then you have a solenoid with an electromagnetic field around it. And if you put this electromagnetic field in a different electromagnetic field that is created by a different set of a coil and a metal core that is actually connected with the same wire, so that the same current is running through this rotating part and the stationary part, then you can create a different electromagnetic field, and then this part that you put on an axle starts to rotate. So this is the general principle of a DC traction motor, a series of wound DC traction motor, creating two electromagnetic fields, one in the stationary coil in the stator and one in the rotating part, the armature or rotor. And we have found out that at a certain point the back EMF that is created in this rotor will take care that the speed does not accelerate anymore. And we have found in the video about the field weakening that if you weaken the field, the outer field of the stator, you can make the rotor rotate even faster with less torque, obviously. And to achieve that, we would put a resistance here so that we divert some of the current that is no more running through the stator but through the resistor, and so we can decrease the magnetic field of the stator. That was in a short run through all the stuff that we have looked at for the traditional DC traction motors, for the field weakening, for the transitioning, for the traction control with cutting in and cutting out resistances. There are, I think, 3 videos about this altogether. So if you are interested, you can watch those videos to hear this in length and not in such a fast run through. The problem with our DC traction motor of the series wound variety that has been around almost on all the trains, locomotives, multiple units until about the 1990s is that you cannot connect those cables to the rotating part in a fixed way, because otherwise you will always twirl up your cables. So you need actually brushes running on a contact plate, a commutator, and there is wear and tear obviously that runs down those brushes. So here on these parts they're sitting brushes, and this was always one problematic part of these motors. The other thing is that controlling and balancing torque versus rotation speed was always a difficult thing with the resistances, with the transitioning, with the field weakening. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a setup of an motor, an electric motor, where we can just control the rotating speed and the rotating force, the torque, just as we want it, and even leave it up to a computer to do that. And those two advantages more or less led to the invention of the asynchronous AC traction motor. So how can we achieve that? How can we disconnect the rotating part from a wire, for example? If we don't need to have a wire here, then we don't need brushes. Why do we have a wire on the rotating part? Because we need to have a magnetic field on the rotating part. Okay, maybe we can get this magnetic field on the rotating part without putting a wire to it. How can that be? Maybe with induction. If we move our magnetic field that was static here on the stator around the rotating part, then we can maybe induce a current in the rotor without connecting it to a wire. But how can we rotate our magnetic field of the stator without having the same problem on the stator side here now? The solution is more or less the same trick that people used when inventing movies, motion pictures at the first place. Movies at the time, celluloid movies, are obviously not something that shows a motion, but they create the illusion of motion by showing pictures in a short succession where something is changed from one picture to the other. And if you look at it in a short succession, then it creates the illusion of moving pictures. Maybe we can achieve that and create the illusion of a moving electromagnetic field around our rotor. But first, let's look what kind of current we used in the DC traction motor. This is a diagram that shows the voltage that is applied to the electrics here, and this is a DC current. We always have, as long as we don't change the setting of the transitioning and the resistances, we have the same constant voltage in our DC circuit here. Coming back to rotating our field. We have our axis here where the rotor is supposed to sit on, what more or less turns our wheels then in the end, and this is the magnetic field. So maybe we can achieve something to rotate this magnetic field around our rotor. We don't want really to rotate our parts of the motor, but maybe we can create the illusion of a rotating magnetic field by using at least two pairs of electrodes, coils that create a magnetic field. So let's have, for example, this one and put another one in 120 degrees and a third one in another 120 degrees. And if we just switch on this coil and shortly afterward that one and shortly afterward the yellow one, and at this point the red one would be reversed in its polarity, then we can create the illusion of a rotating electromagnetic field. Then we can put inside our rotor a metal thing, obviously, because we need something where we can induce our current. And this one is built a bit in most of those motors actually like a squirrel cage. Why a squirrel cage? This is our axle now we're looking at from 90 degrees turned around. It has two solid sides on the end, and it is connected with a lot of bars that are not going in a straight line but slightly askew to create the current and the magnetic flux that we want. And it is also filled with a lot of very thin metal layers, not have it solid, to avoid eddy currents. Eddy currents we had in the video about the eddy current brake the other day, and we know that eddy currents slow down our rotating force, and this is what we actually used in the eddy current brake, but we don't want to have it here because we don't want to have the eddy current slowing down the rotation that we have here. This is why this cylinder is more or less filled with many thin metal layers, and this magnetic field induces a more or less circular current running in this rotor. So actually this drum here would be even wider, not that narrow that as I painted it here, but more broad, but this does not really matter. And the current would not go all the way, but in those thin layers to create very, very little eddy currents. This current flowing through our rotator now creates its own magnetic field, and this magnetic field is then aligned in a way that it does not conform with the magnetic field on the outside, so it will create a turning motion. You remember this Lenz rule with the three fingers of one hand, and you never know if you have to use the right hand or the left hand, but magnetic flux in the magnetic field, electric flux in the current that is induced, and if you want it like this, the material flux, the movement of the metal conductor, are always sitting perpendicular on each other in x, y, z coordinates. So this creates a force that turns the rotor out of the existing magnetic field that we have here. And the alignment of those connecting parts enhance this. But since we are not leaving the red coil on, but switching it more or less off, and the green one on, for example, will just push the rotor further. So the rotor will never catch up. It will always try to align in a way that the magnetic field is perpendicular to the other one, or that it sits perpendicular to the other one. So don't really quote me on the alignment on the magnetic fields here. I did my best on PowerPoint what I can do to create the illusion, but you can see the point. At this point the current is induced and the magnetic field wants to turn the rotor around, and we are always moving the electric field around, the magnetic field around the rotor, and it constantly tries to adjust. But it never will, because we're always turning the magnetic field around. And by that means we can turn the rotor without connecting it to a wire. Obviously, we need to have 3 circuits more or less that operate those 3 different coils. And this calls for a different setup in the current that we are sending in those coils. We are no longer using a constant DC current, but we need to have a current that runs like this. On the red coil, for example, we need to have a current that is going from one extreme in plus to the other extreme in minus to the other extreme in plus and back again all the time. Sine waves. This is not actually a sine wave, but again, this was the best that I could do in PowerPoint. And if the red line here, for example, is at maximum plus, then we will have the maximum magnitude of our magnetic field here with the North Pole on one side. Then it drops, it gets to the point where there is no magnetic field at all anymore here, and then it drops even more to the negative maximum. Then we have the field at its maximum strength, but with the North Pole no longer on this side, but on this side. Then it drops again to 0, it will vanish, and then it will get stronger until we have it on its strongest with the North Pole again back here. And that works the same way with the green and with the yellow one, but always shifted with the 120 degrees. And by that we can create this seemingly rotating magnetic field around our rotor. This is what they call 3-phase alternating current. One of those lines would be the alternating current that we know from the wall sockets in our home, and 3 of them put together in more or less this scheme, where we have maximum red, negative maximum green, maximum yellow, negative maximum red, maximum green, negative maximum yellow, and then again it starts after 6 steps. It starts again with maximum red. And then we have turned our magnetic field once around the whole 360 degrees of the cycle. And this is more or less the ruling principle of an AC, an alternating current traction motor. It is called an asynchronous motor because the rotor is not running synchronously with the magnetic field, but it always lags behind a bit because it always tries to adapt but never can. Just like the horse or the donkey that is following the carrot, it is always trying to get its field aligned, but it never will because the field is always running just ahead of it. This is why it is called an asynchronous motor. It isn't called an induction motor because we are inducing the current in the rotor, not connecting it with a wire. And it is sometimes also called a squirrel cage motor because this thing here looks a bit like a training wheel for a rodent, a hamster or a squirrel or whatever you might have. And those are the 3 names that I have found here. A brushless motor is sometimes actually used for a motor of that kind that has a power inverter built in so that you can feed DC motor in, and then it more or less creates this current setup here. Obviously, you need some device that builds, creates, makes this kind of current feed for your different coils, and this is usually a variable frequency drive, a VFD. I want to treat it here as a black box because it is getting super complicated when we are looking deeper into this thingy, maybe in another video, in another stream. And this thing typically takes DC current, just like here, and then with a set of switches, 6 for example, are often used. It creates this pattern here and divides it on these 3 lines, and creates this shifted pattern here that after 6 steps repeats itself. The switches that are used in there, we will get to that in a second. And then we have actually 2 parameters that we can directly control with the variable frequency device. One is the frequency, and this translates into the turning speed of the motor. After 6 phases, boom, 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 we are once around the 360 degrees circle. So if we actually increase the frequency here, if we shorten the distance until the same pattern repeats itself, then we increase the turning speed because the rotor will just be accelerated accordingly. At the other end, if we increase the value until you reach the maximum, the positive and the negative, then we also increase the magnetic flux via the voltage in the magnetic field, this resulting into a higher turning force, into a higher torque. And this means by modulating the frequency and the voltage in the output of our variable frequency drive, we can directly control how fast the motor is turning and with what torque, with what turning force it is torquing. Obviously, this is highly simplified. It is much more complicated in the actual application, but I think this is what you can say about the ruling principles of a device of that kind. And DD Radar says this is exactly what we have in our metro trains. Yes. I think this is exactly what you have on the metro trains. More or less since the 1990s, every modern multiple unit that runs on electricity, so EMU, has those kind of motors. It started, if I recall correctly, with the DB Baureihe 120, that is no longer in use, I think, and then with the 152 and the early trucks versions, and yeah, then the trucks line developed and branching out with the ALP 46 in the United States, and on the other hand, the Siemens technology went on with the Eurosprinters, Taurus, and then the Vectron. That is more or less this line of development from this motor. And in this variable frequency device, you more or less have a power inverter creating 3-phase AC out of the DC input that you get. You can either get the DC input from the DC overhead catenary directly, or you get an AC, a 1-phase AC input from the overhead catenary, and then you use a rectifier to create to transfer it into DC first before then inverting it back into 3-phase AC with the variable frequency device. Again, highly simplified the whole thing. But this allows you to have a multi-system lock like our Vectron, where you can have AC input and DC input, and it doesn't really matter, because if you get AC input, you just transfer it into DC input with a rectifier, and if you get DC input, then you have DC input in the first place. And then you run it to 1 or 2 inverters, and the switches that are used in those variable frequency device are those mesmerizingly named GTO thyristors or the IGBTs, the gate turn on thyristors, and the insulated gate bipolar transistors. Those are more or less those electric switches that are used to create this by means of pulse width modulation, so that you can more or less without limits create any form of three-phase AC that you want in the output. This is controlled by a microprocessor, obviously, and yeah, controls the force, the torque, and the frequency of 4 traction motors running on your locomotive. And those GTO thyristors and IGBTs, I don't know, what do you have on your metro trains, GTOs or IGBTs? I think the GTOs are the older technology, the IGBTs are the newer ones, and especially those GTO thyristors make those typical sounds on those trains when they are starting. Sounds like they're changing gears in a short succession, but it's actually those switches doing this pulse width modulations. At least this is what people tell you, or what you can read up in the sources. So I hope this was not totally confusing in the end, but I thought it might be actually the best way to get into the AC traction motor, three-phase AC traction motor world with the Vectron. And obviously the Vectron is the locomotive that I use, that uses highly developed machines of that kind with vector speed control, indirect vector speed control, and then it is getting really arcane and hard to follow whatever systems and patterns are used here. But the general principle and what the advantages are over DC traction motors, I think this is something that we can quite easily understand. In German, this kind of three-phase AC is called Drehstrom, turning current, for obvious reason, because it is actually turning the wheel around. At least we create the illusion that this happens. Let's drive our train home using those asynchronous motors. You have IGBT on your traction motors, great. Yeah, the British Railway Class 323, for example, is a train that started out with a GTO system and was modernized with IGBT technology, for example. ICE3 is still using GTOs, I think. Yeah, and it is interesting that the ICE4 is actually slower than the ICE3, but I think this is actually due to the fact that the 330 kilometers per hour that the ICE3 can go, or is allowed to go, it can never go, it can go nowhere on German tracks. So there is no point. There is no point in investing in even higher speeds. The trains are from early 2000s to 2010s. Yeah, I think this is typical for the time. In the 90s you had the GTOs mostly, and then in the 2000s it started with the IGBTs. But don't ask me what the advantage is of the IGBTs over the GTOTs. So, Now we're coming back on the regular line. As soon as we're down the ramp with the whole train, we can, if we want, accelerate it to 120 again. So that's what makes the sound. Yeah. At least this is what you can read there. Because those switches are switching really, really, really fast, and they are... And the frequency that they are switching with to create this artificial waveform in the current is modulated. And this is why you have this different sound developing. At least this is how I understood it. With the Austrian setup, by the way, the train is not doing this cutting out of traction motors. This is only done in Germany. And William Green told me that he implemented the different usage of the Nachbremswirkung between Germany and Austria. That in Austria the train is never using any additional air brake on the locomotive, only on the cars and running freight trains in service brake applications. Now we have to prepare ourselves for the slowdown to 80. That will start, what does it say? At 14.7. Oh, 80. So we have a bit to go. So I will aim for passing the LF6 for the 80 reductions with no more than 95 kilometers, so that I do not have to do the PZB slowdown to 70. But that means we have to slow down in time to 90. To be below the 95. Here is an IC with a Baureihe 101 that also has this kind of traction motors. One of the earlier locomotives. So, I will already prepare for slowing down. Another IC. It's great that I actually have my layers back. But I'm still missing Schnellfahrstrecke Kassel-Würzburg. Cajon Pass and Spirit of Steam, obviously. Shortly there will be the diverging track to the freight yard. After that, Dresden I think it is. And then the LF6 with the 80. And since I slowed down to 90, we should not get hit by the 1000 Hertz. And we can slow down to 80 slowly without going to the 65. Here is the LF6 with the 80. And we're not getting one. But the problem is, you can see it, we're getting a yellow signal. So we have to slow down our train for the yellow signal. So even though the train is blending in the e-brakes with the air brakes when you apply them, you can always add more electric brake by using the combined power brake handle. So in anticipation of a 500 Hertz monitoring in PZB M, I need to be at 30 at the end of the 500 Hertz monitoring. So I will just approach the signal with 30. The LZB Nothalt. Well, from what it says on the switch, it is for actually stopping your train under LZB. But I do not know the exact protocol. I would have to look it up. Here's the 500 Hertz. So obviously if you feel that you need to stop under LZB, you can use this switch to stop the system and tell the system that you needed to stop. But if you have to activate it after you activated the emergency brake, or before that, or during it, or instead of it, I would have to look that up. All those special LZB scenarios are not really in the game so far. So we can actually release the air brakes when we're standing here at the red signal. And also the dynamic brake. Well, that was a great stop. I can't see my signal anymore. Because the AFB holding brake will take over and use the indirect brake to hold the train in place. So if you're not actually sitting in a gradient, you can just rely on the AFB to take over. Yes, you are right. That was a bad stop. I was a bit reluctant. Now I'm getting a wet head. A wet head to punish me for the bad stop. Well, obviously in real life I would just lean to the front a bit, wouldn't I? Yes. You just wrote it on the chat. You can do it in the game by standing up and crouching down. Now we have simulated our leaning to the front. Or maybe there is one of the cameras that can be moved. Now we can see it. But that is a bit awkward because we cannot see what is happening outside. Is there maybe a nicer camera view like this one? But this probably is even worse than the one that we are sitting on. That does not improve things a lot. Now, that was the best one. See, the Röderau says I once botched on top of dashboard and I can't get down. Alright. So we obviously have to wait for a different train. Pocket Snickers, hey! Here's for introducing more new but useless camera angles. I'm just making up for my bad stop where I can't see the signal. The thing is, I will probably see a number appearing here on the... What is it then? Probably a set S3 indicator. And then I know that the signal is no longer red. Because maybe we can actually see the train that is supposed to pass. Since we are not under pressure, we can actually go and see what train it is that we have to wait for. It's probably still sitting here at the station. Yes, it is. It's this Talent 2. It does not want to leave. Oh. Interesting. No driver. Ah, those are the red lights. Sometimes you cannot really see that those are the red lights. So this is the back. And this is probably the track that we are supposed to go to, right? So we will have for this train to leave until we can go. Yeah, but I saw that angle from over your right shoulder that shows nothing. Yes, totally. Because it is the angle that is actually supposed to show whatever the switches or fuses on the back of the cab. So do you like Trains in World 4 Pocket Snickers? I still have to say I'm quite happy about it. Even though I still do not have all my previously owned DLCs back. But eventually this will work, I guess. So my good train, don't you want to leave here so that we can proceed? Ah, maybe you can hear the doors closing sound. Good thing the driver lowered the blind. He would be totally blinded by the sun here. Pocket Snicker says I haven't bought it because I waited a year to buy Trains in World 3 thinking they were going to do a 2-year cycle. Well, yeah. I see your point. But to be fair, the routes alone that come with the Trains in World 4 are worth the price. Now we got a yellow one with a 6. We can actually see it. See, the light is actually visible. Just not the red one. So first we are limited to 20 obviously until we pass the signal. Because of the restricted 500 Hz, because we stopped. We're passing a KS2 that we have to acknowledge. And that limits us to 60. But with the still restricted 1000 Hz, we are limited to 40 since we passed the signal. Oh, that sounded like slipping wheels. Yeah, first traction motor car out. So not overdoing it on the wet track, and we're running uphill anyway. So I think I can switch off that one here. And he says, I haven't looked at it because I wasn't happy, still waiting on fixes for some really old rules that were promised. Yes, I can feel you on that too. And, well, when I got into Train Sim World 2 at the time, I actually thought, when I read they have a preservation crew that will take care that all the new developments will be installed on the older routes too. I thought, wow, that is a bold promise, because it is getting increasingly difficult with more and more DLCs coming on the market. And with Train Sim World 3, the preservation crew was more or less delegated to a special task force, and now nobody is talking about this institution anymore. So that is a bit sad, but it is more or less inevitable, because with 90 or 100 DLCs on the market, you cannot keep them up to date. What a surprise, yeah, you name it. Yeah, but well, to be fair, it is actually almost impossible to keep that standard if you always have to add the new stuff to the older routes. But I think their approach was a bit weird. They were working for years on end on applying this this functionality where you can step up on platforms by pressing E on older routes, and automatically closing crossing gates on older routes for no reason, actually, because the benefit that you got from that was marginal. Same with passenger information screens and stuff. Just have to accept that the older roads don't have it. So they should have concentrated on fixes, real bug fixes, gameplay fixes, fixes on the locomotive models, like switches not working properly, signaling not working properly, safety systems not working properly. So I would have invested the main hours there. So this part of the route is always laggy. Now there's a trucks with the new Eanos cars. Holy lag. And signal red. We have to stop on the bridge. This is the Nachbremswirkung, by the way. You can see it here. And after releasing the auto brake, you get always a little jolt in the brake cylinders. Pocketsnigger says, that's not what I care about, it's that London commuter was still broken and Peninsula corridor was still broken. Yeah, Peninsula Corridor, for example, that was bad that it was broken. But, well, before I get into this, let's make sure that I stop better than last time. So that I can actually see the signal. Again, we can release. And now we're on the bridge here. Unfortunately, it is raining, otherwise we had this mesmerizing view on Dresden-Neustadt with the Semperoper, and here you can see the Frauenkirche that was rebuilt after it was utterly destroyed in World War II. Here is a new, or rather newish, Congress Center where I actually had the pleasure of spending a couple of days, like 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. And there is this cigar factory that looks like a mosque or something. Yeah, it's okay. I think the old routes should be fixed. I was actually experimenting with the editor and how, for example, you can fix the speed signs on London Commuter. There are at least 3 speed signs that are wrong, and I tried to actually duplicate the speed signs and put a speed sign with the correct reading in front of the old one. And it works in the editor. I actually figured out how to do that, how to operate those speed signs. But I cannot save it, at least not at the moment. Maybe when it will be possible to cook stuff that you do in the editor so that it actually goes into the game. So there are at least some limited things that you can fix on your own. So another train that we have to wait for. Standing here on the bridge. Yes, there's another train coming. Another trucks. A 185.5 this time, I think. First one was a 185.2. Oh, and signal cleared. Again, limit to 20. And Peninsula Corridor is just too beautiful route to not be fixed. Yes, I like those black freight locos, the MRCA liveries. They are nice. And you say mighty Elbe, Labe. The river that connects the Czech Republic and the Eastern Germany and Western Germany as well in Hamburg. I would like them if they don't have that stupid sound, yes. But it's the same sound that comes with the red ones too, right? So it's not the color and not the livery. Sometimes with this stuttering and lagging, it does not even take your keyboard input. Since the signal was green, we can release. We can release. But still, just in case we're not at least 550 miles to the next signal that gives us a Cetus 3V. Let's stay below. The other day I was doing a run here in evening mist at 143 with the Dostos here, and it looked so great with the mist and the fog and the lighting. The night lighting is really great still on this route, maybe even better than it used to be. 1000 Hertz, is it a restricted one? No, it's not a restricted one. That means we can accelerate to the 60 that are prescribed. So the release was actually proper. Yes, it says 70. Then we are allowed to go 65. Also acknowledging the repeater. Pocketsnicker says Peninsula Corridor is my favorite route to run. The lapped brakes make it more engrossing. Yeah, that is true. I like the manually lapping brakes on the F40. And I prefer US Locos for some reasons. I totally see the appeal of American Locos. But I'll also see the appeal of British Locos and of German Locos, Electro Locos and Diesel Locos. And I'm really so happy about the variety in the game in terms of rolling stock as well as in terms of routes. I would totally love to have more variety. Czech routes, Danish routes, Dutch routes, routes in Belgium, routes in Wales, more French routes. In anticipation for the 500 Hertz, we have to slow down to 45 max. So I let it drop to 40. And then let's just have the train rolling. Here you can see the elephants and the traffic jam they are creating. Mastery reward, one of the greatest mastery rewards that there is in the game. This traction motor cutout also works when you are using the traction motors for slowing down the train. You can see that we are braking only on 2 traction motors at the moment.
Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung.
For once, this 1A and 1B braking stuff has been modeled properly. You will realize that when... Oh, don't want to stop the train here prematurely. Need to get it closer. The 1A and 1B you might recognize, might have realized that when just applying 1A, you're not getting any braking force at all. You have to move it to 1B, and then you can move it back to 1A as a partial release to reduce the braking force again. And we will see after the next patch, William Green has talked about modifying the brake valve in a way that it starts with 1B instead of 180. So here we are. That was this service with the Vectron. Yeah, and CD Raider says that's why I like new technologies. Yeah, I love it both. I love running the old British diesels, and I love running the new locomotives, and I love running those battleships of US locomotives and the little shunters as well. And this is so great that this game gives us the opportunity that we can drive everything everywhere, from the subway train to the 7-8 locomotive mega trains in the US. And Trains in World 4, I was actually quite angry when they announced it, but I have to admit now it was the right thing to do. Maybe they have realized on their own that leaving it with Trains in World 3 was quite nice, but not the real deal. And the free roam is exceptionally helpful if you want to check out what the signals are actually doing. And this locomotive does not only look great, it also performs great. I only wish they would actually improve the rain visuals a bit. Not only the one on the screen, but also the one that you are getting here. Well. Okay, lady. Looks like you took over for me and you're taking the train to the Czech Republic now. Let's see how far we can go there. No, this is already the end. Yes! Here we have reached the end of the represented area, and in a couple of hours the train will arrive in Prague with this nice lady driving it and me sleeping in the second man seat. Thank you very much, guys, for bearing with me on this long stream while Matt was streaming his charity stream. Dobru Noc. Now you have to tell me why Dobru Noc uses the accusative case in the Dobru. It's Dobrý den, Dobrý večer, Dobrý... What was it? Afternoon? But it's Dobru Noc. Why is there the accusative case? Tell me next time. Thank you very much. And while we are pondering, because Notch is she. I see, so it is always accusative, but you don't see it with the Dobry den. Ah, because den is a he, and večer is a he, and it is always the accusative case. Well, that explains it. So we have not only clarified the AC traction motor, but also the usage of good night, good day, and good evening in Czech. Thank you very much, CD Radar. See you next week. I'm not quite sure if I'm be on next Sunday. Maybe I will have to take a break for a week, but at least in 2 weeks' time. Have a good night. Take care, guys. Pocket Snickers, thank you for contributing in the chat. Have fun with the game. Bye bye.